Usually, we think of human rights as dealing with the more dramatic issues of torture, jailing, killings. But actually, work on human rights can be very innovative, particularly on preventing human rights violation. And innovation along these lines has to do with empowerment of the stakeholders and right holders like out there. For example, when I was in government, we found out that actually in the upland areas, women farmers have no rights to land, and because of that, there's massive domestic violence, and they are not part of the community efforts to deal with the encroachment on their areas. But so what we did was to issue a policy that women can actually also receive titles and rights to their lands. And it created quite a massive change in the community because women being empowered, was now able to deal with domestic violence. And they became organized, and they became part of the community effort to deal with other issues that are impinging upon their community. We had a similar project like that when I was the global manager of the small grants program in India, where we simply provided the women grants for sustainable livelihood, actually taking care of cows. And then from the cow dung, they had biogas production. And from the proceeds of the gardens that they have, they were able to set up retail stores. It created a massive change in the power relationship in the community. The women, which were in the past marginalized, became empowered, and because of the shift of power, again, domestic violence was reduced. And then the women actually became also a major part of the defense of the community against encroachment upon their lands and on destructive parties that were actually destroying their environment. So, as they say, women hold half of the sky. And so, simply by empowering women, you are actually also dealing in a more preventative ways violations of human rights. The condition that make it work really has something to do with collaboration amongst those that have knowledge about human rights and those that actually is willing to learn. For example, the fact that we have some, well, let's say progressive government people that were with us during my time in government. The fact that there's small grants program that knows about the importance of human rights and knowledge that there are out there communities that need support so that they become aware of their rights themselves and that they can organize to protect their rights. These are very important ingredients, and when you put them all together in a very collaborative way, in a way where empowerment becomes the aim of those with the power and the duty bearer of human rights, then it succeeds. What I think is important in human rights advocacy or implementation of human rights action is actually having the right mindset. Human rights is not just an approach, but really basic to it is the mindset, the culture of really standing for human rights. Human rights work is risky. It's difficult, and unless you have the right mindset, then we won't be able to really do good action on human rights. It's also important to think of human rights in terms of the responsibilities of the duty bearer vis-a-vis the right holders. In WWF, in our field projects, we are actually duty bearers. We have a responsibility to take care of the needs of our stakeholders, particularly on the human rights needs. And then in some cases also we are right holders. We have our human rights ourselves that we have to protect, particularly in our relationship with government. And we have to always remind the government that we have rights and that they are duty bearers to protect our rights. Important to remember all of this because in some cases we tend to be silent when human rights violations occur out there, and it's tragic when we become silent because when we become silent, we don't know our duty and we don't recognize the right holders, and we don't also recognize that we are ourselves right holders, then violations of human rights occur with impunity. The right mindset perhaps starts with an awareness of what what are human rights, and there's a lot of human rights, and it doesn't only include our rights to information, our rights to participation and organization. It even includes rights to education, to health, to the opportunity for employment. So we have to be aware what is it that are considered human rights out there, and then be able to actually defend as strongly as we can these rights. Any weakening of these rights, any violation, if left unchecked, will erode these rights and become really massive problems for society. And I myself have experienced how it led to dictatorships and dictatorships leading to actually impunity in terms of destroying the environment in the interest of profit and vested interests. So awareness of human rights and the willingness to defend it as much as we can, as strongly as we can. You have a WWF that actually does not design its own projects, that co-designs its projects. In fact, it initiates conceptualization of the actions it would take from the communities, particularly the right holders of the places where we work at. You know, so we don't end up dominating and telling them this is what we should do, but rather take a listening mode and ask them, what is it that we should do? That's the WWF, that is for inclusive conservation. At the same time, you have a change in the structure itself of the network. We would have advisory groups that come from indigenous peoples and local communities. We would have in the future, a member of the international board, a member of even our senior management teams that come from indigenous peoples and local communities. We would have embedded human rights into our network, into our ways of doing things, by having a dedicated high-level official, a director of human rights in the network. We would have staff that actually represents diversity, that actually also come from indigenous peoples in local communities. We won't have projects that are going to be led by external people all the time. Perhaps at the beginning, it may be led by an expert from the outside, but our projects will have over time a situation where they are led by the community leaders themselves, not by WWF. Human rights seems to be somewhat common sense. It should be there, but actually it's not there. It's in fact there are in some cases more violations rather than recognition of human rights. So in a sense, what we have to do is actually go outside the box, change the system. What we need is systemic change, and systemic change can only occur if we innovate, if we change the standard processes, the regular processes that we're doing, and go beyond what we're doing now, raise the bar in some cases, and that's actually the true meaning of innovation. So unless we're willing to change, we're not going to be able to actually recognize and respect human rights because it takes work. It takes in many cases a struggle to be able to actually recognize and protect and implement human rights. The first thing that colleagues, especially those practitioners in the field, should think about is the matter of empowerment. because unless you empower the communities that we work with in these places that we are working in, especially the more difficult places, uh, the more that we won't be able to actually achieve our goals. At the end of the day, we end up with the very dependent communities. And, with dependent communities, we become very ineffective and very inefficient in the way we're doing conservation work. That's why there's that link between empowerment and human rights approaches is one way towards that empowerment and effectiveness and efficiency in conservation work. Conservation work is a long-term process. It's a life's mission. It's not a project. And in many communities that we work with, these communities are very dynamic. External factors come in time and time again, many of them destructive. So unless they themselves are able to deal with these powers, with these destructive powers, because they're empowered, because they know the human rights, they know how to defend the human rights, then any conservation that we will do will be only short term in their success, rather than sustainable in the way that we wanted them to be. The planning with community, in fact, perhaps the first thing we have to do is really um, listening to communities, and then planning with them after listening and learning from them is very important, because then we know that we are actually meeting their needs, not meeting our own needs. Actually, if we come up with projects that meet our own needs, that's a violation of human rights, because we're imposing our own power, our dominance on them, rather than sharing power with them. So critical to inclusive conservation and to human rights approaches is actually listening, and then learning from them, and then co-designing with them, and then eventually making sure that they are empowered so that they don't need us eventually, that they can do their own thing themselves and defend themselves, and chart their own sustainable development path. Systems change actually starts with each of ourselves. Value change is very critical to systems change. That's why many experts actually say that culture trumps strategy, because unless there is strong and correct values in every one of us, including the value of coming together, then we can't have system change. And system change that is based on really very strong incentives or the fear of penalties are never long lasting. So they're not system change actually. If we want system change, then it should be based on very strong individual values, then put together, creating a societal value. My appeal to colleagues is that we take on human rights as the heart of the way we do things in our conservation work. And to do this, we have to really self-reflect, and we have to come together and share our experiences and knowledge on human rights. I know that many colleagues have been at this work for quite some time. I know that there are others also that are somewhat a little bit more confused, starting work along these lines as a neophyte. And there are colleagues that are actually faced with dilemmas in the field on what to do in terms of human rights approaches, in terms of dealing with violations of human rights. So we have to come together and exchange our experiences and our expertise, and come to a unified understanding and a unified and consistent approach to embedding human rights within the network. And from there, even go beyond that and embrace other stakeholders out there, other organizations working on the same line, and share experiences and knowledge with them, so that at the end we have actually a network strong in human rights internally and a strong in human rights approaches externally. And that's what it takes to create systems change that will actually implement human rights out there.